Good afternoon, Chair. Your meeting is now live.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, members and officers and external audit, of course. I'm Councillor Leo Madden, Chair of the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual meeting that's been broadcast to enable the press and the public to view it. We are meeting virtually in response to the limitations based on governance by COVID-19. The City Solicitor has advised that in accordance with Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authorities Meetings Regulations 2020 number 392. Can I ask members to introduce themselves, if I may? Could I start with Councillor Simon Bowser, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor Simon Bowser, present.
Thank you. Councillor John Ferret.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor John Ferret, Portsgrove Ward Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Judith Smythe.
Councillor Judith Smythe, present.
Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. We will have two latecomers. Councillor Neil Young's at a conference at the minute, starting 2 o'clock, I think he said, and Councillor Tom Wood is tied up in a meeting going a bit longer than he thought it would, so they'll arrive at some time today. Okay, so that was the apologies. Have any members any declarations of interest? None. None? None. Okay, thank you. Can we go on to the minutes of the meeting of the 15th of January, please? And I'll do them with accuracy and matters arising at the same time, if that's all right, members. So can we do, I'll do the big page numbers. Okay, so page 7. Page 8. I don't know, Judith, the second paragraph there, I don't know if that could sort it out, did it? This committee that we were setting up on the terms of reference.
No, I didn't have, we've sort of gone quiet over the last 6 weeks. I'll pick it up and just make sure, and I won't unnecessarily, I don't think anybody else particularly was interested in this, so I won't make a big deal of it.
I think remember, did it go to, it's either going to Cabinet or Council, I can't remember, but it's moved on from us, Judith.
Has it? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask for the papers.
Okay, thanks. Anything else on page 8? Okay, page 9. Page 10. Page 11. And page 12. Can we agree those as a true record, members? Thank you very much. Lovely, thank you. Can I now call item 4, please? Elected members, training report and calendar. And I think Helen need. Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask members to introduce themselves. That's terrible, isn't it? Well, they'll introduce themselves as they go along, won't they? I think. Oh, Roland, you're doing this, aren't you?
I am, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. Sorry. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Roland Bryant. I'm the Learning and Development Business Partner for the City Council, and I've pulled this report together, a very brief information-only report on behalf of the City Solicitor, just detailing the plans for member training for this year. Obviously, last year saw us not really delivering much in the way of training, but the online presence was there. And what we've done is we've taken forward that online presence and predominantly produced a training calendar that will be, the majority of it will be online and accessing online resources. We've kept it in the same format in terms of induction training, committee training, priority training, e-learning and personal development training. And what you've got as Appendix 1 is a draft at the moment. You'll see that there are a number of courses where we've got to be confirmed, and we've started to pull those dates together and the final draft will be with you and ready for any new members starting post the May elections. We have tried to be as innovative as we can and introduce some new tools. There's an online book and podcast materials that are quite good and very usable, and we've learned from our recent training on hidden disabilities that delivering the training at either first thing in the morning or at different times is actually helpful to members in terms of increasing attendance. So we are planning to continue with that, and that's basically the report, unless there's any questions.
I've got you, mate. Yeah, can I say, just in your introduction there on page 3.2, I'm pleased to see that the increase, you call it, on mental health issues, and I think that's got to be welcome, because I think we'll have problems with people with mental health difficulties for some time, even after COVID. But thank you for that, and good format, plenty of courses there. Could I call Judith Smythe, please?
Odd enough, we've been discussing this within our group recently, and we wondered, I know in the past we've received statistics about the attendance at such courses, and I wondered if we still did that, and I wondered if also whether we're strict enough with members to make sure they are attending at least a good number of those that are marked with the little exclamation mark in the black bubble. I think that sometimes people do need a refresher on some of the aspects of behaviour, and nobody here present because everybody's very experienced, but I think that it would be helpful to really encourage people to go, to make it very easy for them to book in, and to perhaps send out invitations to these when they come up, and to monitor how many people actually go.
Yes, we certainly will be looking to produce data in terms of attendance, and I think we've established a fairly good model in terms of sending out invitations via the secretaries. I think that seems to work best in terms of getting the information out to members. So we certainly will be doing that, and Natasha Edmonds, our director, has asked me if I would pull together data for a future committee meeting so that we can share that with you.
Okay, Judith.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. John, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just endorse your comments in terms of the programme itself. It looks really comprehensive. Certainly a lot more on offer there than when I began as a councillor 9 years ago. So it's good to see that we are offering, a comprehensive package. In terms of Judith's point, I think that's a perennial debate about mandatory training and about priority training, and then about optional training. My view, and I think really it's probably been the committee view, is that the groups should be managing that in terms of the training. I think sharing those statistics with the group leaders is probably the best approach, he says, as an independent councillor. But I think in terms of the mandatory training, then clearly, I think if councillors aren't undertaking the mandatory training, then, that clearly that needs to be followed up with them. But also maybe those are statistics that could be more widely published. And just in terms, it's a question to Roland, in terms of the delivery of training, has there been any indication? I know it's been more limited in terms of the training that's been done, but is there an indication that you or that the council gets greater attendance by delivering online? Because my experience is that doing the training online is just as beneficial as face-to-face, and face-to-face does present difficulties in terms of when the timings are, if it's after work, if there is clearly a need to travel into the council offices. So I just wondered if we've got evidence of a greater take-up. Yes, I mean, if I speak more broadly in terms of online training, in general, I think we do see that it is making it more accessible to people. We've obviously had to modify
how we deliver, because we can't expect people to sit for too long in front of screens and without the necessary breaks. But I think we've been learning a lot over the last year, and we've certainly developed our offer. And I do believe that we will have a much more offer of online training. We won't necessarily just revert straight back to face-to-face training, because I think we've proved that it certainly does work. It does make it more accessible to people. There are certain topics and things that we will probably still need to do face-to-face, and I think we're just taking a pragmatic view of that, and we'll basically, I think we're just learning as we're going along at the moment, and really sort of taking, looking at what we're doing well, what's not going so well, and then trying to sort of move forward each time after we've delivered each course.
Okay, John.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Simon Bosher, please. Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think to a degree both Judith and John have stolen a little bit of my thunder with regards to attendance and also the online aspect, because certainly some courses seem to get offered during the working day, and there seems to be a tendency, I guess, for officers to think it's during my working day without necessarily appreciation of the fact that it might be a working councillor's working day. And certainly for somebody like me who has to eat into my holiday for committee meetings, there is a pick and choose approach, shall we say, to some of these training courses, because again, I'll have to take time off and then I get into conflict with my family. By moving it more to online, sort of opens up the evenings a little bit better, and I think there will be a better take up of that, particularly as John pointed out, there is travelling time, and I've seen a lot of courses that sort of run from 11 till 1 during the day that get put on by council officers. That's effectively an entire day off for somebody like me, because it goes across both morning and afternoon, and if it's in the council, I'm then travelling as well. So from a personal perspective, there is a reluctance to do the course, or certainly weigh up, is it mandatory, is it essential, or is it optional? And if it falls into the optional category, my hand on my heart, would I rather be spending that day as a day off with my family, or a 2-hour training session in the middle of the day on something that's optional? I think that decision sort of makes itself. Just going on to something else, there's a lot of mention of the Portsmouth Learning Gateway. I wouldn't necessarily know how to access that, and it seems the report puts the onus on the councillors being proactive and accessing the training via the Portsmouth Learning Gateway. And that sort of relies on the fact that all the other councillors that are not necessarily a member of Governance and Audit Standards are actually going to sit and read a report on a Governance and Audit Standards Committee meeting. And I suggest that they probably wouldn't necessarily do that. Could it be that once we get this in place, that we take a proactive approach to perhaps registering all 42 councillors with it, and sending the emails out so that we're being proactive and saying, here's your registration details, this is what it can offer you, all you need is a password, etc., rather than assuming that councillors are actually going to read a report that's buried in a Governance and Audit and Standards Committee meeting, which I suggest they probably wouldn't, and an appendix for that matter as well. Then you might get a little bit more of a proactive buy-in to those sorts of things. And certainly they can see sight of the dates coming up, because they do work well going out through the member secretaries, that sometimes they'll come out at a fortnight's notice. Say in a fortnight's time, you've either got 3 till 5 on this Wednesday afternoon, or 6 till 8 on the Thursday after. That sort of approach. And again, when you're talking about councillors that have full-time jobs, you can't easily give them a fortnight's notice to take an afternoon off if that's what they choose to do. So, in essence, can we look to be proactive in getting the councillors to sign up, rather than expecting them to do something because they've got plenty of other things they can be doing it. And certainly I endorse John's comments. The more that we can move online so that people can sit at home and do it, probably the more buy-in you're going to get to the actual training, in my view. The only other moot point I'd make is that you've got both the planning and the licensing training with a black exclamation mark or a white exclamation mark about it. And it sort of says high importance and is essential. I'd actually use the word for those as mandatory because, as I understood it, you can't sit on either of those two committees unless you've done the training. That's certainly true of planning, but I think it's true of licensing. So those two, in my mind, essential is the wrong choice of words because it gives wriggle room. I would suggest it is mandatory training for the members of the committee. Those are my views. But anyway, it's a good report anyway, Roland. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take all of that on board, and I really useful, helpful suggestions. So thank you for that. We certainly, I think, are intended to be more proactive in terms of pushing the
I agree with all that. It's very important.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you, of course, the mandatory training that we talked about in the past, and that includes equalities training. I am sure, in looking back, I have sat on the licensing committee with people who haven't been to training. That's when it was physical training. I can't say if we're moving on to more online training. So I think it's something that needs to be looked at, not necessarily by you, Roland, but it's something we need to take up with management. No doubt you'll take all those points on board, Roland, anyway.
Yes, thank you,
Roland,
Chair.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Cheers. Are we okay then to note that report, members?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Judith, I think you've started sharing your screen somehow.
I think you have, Judith. Well, something's happened. I don't.
I'm looking at me now. That's not a good look.
Please tell me how to get out of that. I didn't mean to do it.
I know you didn't yet.
How do I get out of it?
Councillor Smythe, press the little X next to where your microphone button is on the screen.
Yes. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, okay.
Is it off now? Yeah, I think so.
Well done.
Back to where I was. Okay,
thank you for telling me. Thank you.
Sorry, Jim, it was the fright of me suddenly looking at myself. That's what did it.
Okay. I see that Councillor Young was in the lobby. Are you here, Councillor Young?
Yes. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for being late.
That's fine. Thank you, Walter. Have you any declarations of interest at all?
I don't have any declarations of interest, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 5, which is the internal audit plan for 2021. I think that's Liz. Is it Liz?
Good afternoon, all. Elizabeth Goodwin, the Chief Internal Auditor for Portsmouth. Chair, if it's okay with you, I will share, hopefully, a report just to take you through a brief summary of the areas that we have in our plan. Says she. Sorry, I will just double check where I have put it. Okay, I now have it. Hopefully you can all see on your screen. So in relation to the annual audit plan, there are discussions with all directors and all key individuals prior to formulating this plan. The current year for 2021, we have kept reasonably fluid, and it is envisaged that we will actually keep this one fluid as well as things progress, and because obviously we are not entirely out of the woods in relation to COVID. I do see that there would probably be some additional grants for us to review, and in addition to that, we are likely to continue with our assurance COVID work during the course of the year in various elements. So the proposed audits are in front of you, and without going through them in each individual areas, but obviously we have under adult social care a number of reviews, children's services. There is a small narrative as to what the provisional scope may include, and each particular area is aligned either to the strategic risks or the corporate outcomes and priorities. So as you will see in the second column, it will depict whether it is a follow-up or if it is full. And as I said, all of these areas we have discussed and carried out a risk assessment to determine which ones would be included. So all of these audits have been scheduled. There are a number of grants that you will note that are required. Those are mandatory for us because we need to submit a statement on a regular basis. I envisage bringing back to you on a regular basis at each meeting any movement within the plan. So if there is any key comments, I am more than happy to answer questions now. So that is the plan for the proposed 2021. Were there any questions, Chair?
Could I, yeah, sorry, could I have you, Judith, come in. Could I just ask something on, I think it's your page 4 or page 48, Lizzie, yeah? There's mention of St Jude's Primary and St Paul's Primary, which is also mentioned in the next report. But then the school 3, 4 and 5, is there something hiding there, or is it, or have we come across them before, or were they meant to be put in? That's the first question.
Okay, I can answer that question straight away. Both of those particular schools were in the current financial year's plan, which is due to close down at the end of March. However, due to resourcing issues and practicalities with being able to undertake various audits, they have both been moved from the current year's plan to next year's plan, which is why they are already named. In relation to school 3, 4 and 5, they will be determined in due course.
Okay, that's fine. It'll come up at some stage. We'll know about it.
Yes.
We will know about it. And just page 8, and just for my satisfaction at all, which is our page 52, home to school transport. Is that completely resolved now, Lizzie? Because we went through a long time worried and concerned about it, and well, I know a member of staff was then paid by education to go into it, but is that one now settled?
In actual fact, we were due to do a full review on home to school transport. However, again, we haven't been able to, so we do not have an overall opinion at present, which is why it is back in the plan for next year. So in all honesty, we haven't reviewed.
Okay, that's fine. Well, hopefully that'll pass with flying colours. Councillor Judith Smythe. Judith?
Thank you. I just wanted, because I can't see what's on the screen, this is the same report we've got on our pack, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much. And I mean, I think I also had some questions about those mystery schools, but you've answered that now, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? Oh, sorry, Councillor Simon Bolster. Simon, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if I can, Lizzie. On page 52, you've got a significant number there, starting with C Defences grant, which says grant certification. Is this effectively an audit of receiving the grant and how the grant has actually been spent?
Yes, it is. Grants either come with a declaration that has to be made by the Chief Exec and the Chief Internal Auditor, or there is a statement generally that is required by the Section 151.
Okay, so on that basis, and I'm probably looking at stuff closer to what I get involved in, the only traffic and transportation related item that I could find was on residents parking. Would you not get involved in things like the Emergency Active Travel Funds things that we use for things like the Elm Grove cycle lane and a variety of other sorts of things?
We would if we would on two reasons. Yes, if there is the statement included within it that says we need that certification to be signed by Chief Internal Auditor and Chief Exec. Or in the case for a number of the COVID ones, because there wasn't that requirement, however, there were volumes of money that were being processed and so forth, we have done cursory work. So 9 times out of 10, there's a definite requirement, it has to be signed off. If there isn't, then it is a little bit more of a judgment call and dependent upon the level of money that is involved as to whether we would do some preliminary work around it. So, for example, there was no requirement for the infection control grant for this year. However, we have done work around that.
Well, I mean, I'm not seeking to change your programme, far from it, but with the amount of money that went into the Emergency Active Travel Fund, where it was spent, and I think it's fair to say that the success has been generally mixed in its approach. I would have anticipated that some sort of internal audit on that might have featured in your programme for 2021-22, because it obviously is of significant interest to the general public as much as anything else.
I will make a note of it, Councillor Bosher. I do envisage there's going to be an awful lot more grants that will pop up throughout the course of the year where it becomes transparent that we definitely need to sign them off. There was a significant increase, for example, for this year. We went from something like on the Portsmouth side approximately 7 to 17. So yeah. So I'll make a note. Yeah. I will double check and we'll have a look. Chances are you're going to see several extra ones come up throughout the year and being added, and we'll have them in our progress report to inform you.
So all the extra money the government gave us to support Portsmouth is going to give you a headache, is it, Lizzie?
It already has, unfortunately, but that's part and parcel of the job.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Councillor John Ferret. John, please.
Yeah, cheers, Leo. Lizzie, I haven't been able to compare this with a previous plan. Maybe I should have, but it just looks like a large programme of work, and clearly, I think we just touched on resources, but it would be helpful to know in terms of the resources available and whether that's then credible in terms of delivering the plan. And I suppose if not, are there priorities, or how would you prioritise from this programme of work in circumstances where you didn't have the resources?
The resource at present, there's an assessment each year, and I have sufficient resource to cover as long as there aren't large variations, for example, perhaps redeployment, long-term sickness, maternity leave, and so forth. So I would have the resource. What I do, though, is I have to align its requirement of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, the plan, to the risk exposure and strategic priorities. So what I would do is I would go back through the plan if there was any resource implications and look at areas where I could either remove because there had been a flux potentially in the risk, or look to reduce the scope of that particular review. Grants, to be honest, I don't have any wriggle room on. They're either going to be required or they're not going to be required to sign off. But there's an awful lot that is in the plan, for example, for this year, where we backed down slightly in relation to some of the fundamental systems because they are inherently audited year in, year out. And for 1 year, I took the decision that I could actually flex some of the tests that we undertake, but for 1 year only. So again, that would form part and parcel. If there are areas that are causing me concern, then I would look to include them in and look to drop out those areas that are of lower risk.
Okay, thanks, Judy.
Is that okay, John?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Lucy, is there anything you'd finished that report? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I don't see any other points members want to make. So can we accept the recommendation that we approve the proposed internal audit plan for 21-22 as set out in Appendix A? Is that all right, members? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Item 6, audit performance status report. Lizzie, you again.
It is, Chair, and if okay, as I said again, I will actually just take you through very briefly as I'm still sharing the report that is presented to you. So on a regular basis, you know, we say, well, how much work have we done in accordance with the agreed work that we had on the table? So there are some standard information which is included. As at the 18th of February, we have 63 items of work, and we have, actually, no, we have more than 63 items of work. We have a number of audits, and we have completed 63, so 70% of the work has been completed. We have a percentage there that is obviously in draft work in progress, and a tiny amount that was identified, i.e. hadn't commenced. I believe in actual fact everything now has been commenced and we are just working through. We have a number of areas which is under section 3, which is the ongoing audit work, and we give you some information in relation to the level of investigations or the items of advice which are contained within this particular section. We've been supporting the organisation in relation to kind of critical activities during the COVID period, and obviously a number of staff have been redeployed. And one of the questions that I think was presented by Councillor Smythe, which was a number of meetings ago, was to have a bit of clarity around potentially how much loss of time we had incurred either at the beginning of the year or throughout. And there is a small element noted in the report, just trying to see where it is now, that actually shows that we had lost some time. I had also agreed a number of meetings ago that the COVID assurance work we would start presenting to you, which was above and beyond the plan of activities that we had on the table. And that work has not concluded, but you can see in section 4, the assurance reporting, a summary of some of those pockets of work that we have already concluded. So for example, the infection control grant, whilst it's a grant, no requirement to sign it off. However, members of the audit team have undertaken some tests in relation to the expenditure and in relation to the framework. There were millions of pounds worth of expenditure administered through the discretionary grants. And again, we've got officers that work quite closely with the revenue services. And again, there is some indication as to the checks that we have performed. And that is again included under section 4. The income loss compensation claim, which is in various stages, it was useful to have an independent assessment in relation to the figures that were being collated and determined on the accountancy side. And the initial indication is we were totally in support of the level of information that was provided and the assessments that were being made. But as I said, this is in various stages, and there will be additional work coming up at the year end and in the new financial year. We've also got there the business rate verification, where again these were in relation to grants, and the final area at the moment that was concluded was also in relation to commercial rents. So those are all under section 4. In relation to section 5, any significant changes, you will note that there are a number of audits that have been added to the plan. And there are unfortunately a number of audits that have been removed from the plan, the majority of which are because it is quite difficult to perform some of the tests without physically going out on site. And so for each particular review, a risk assessment is performed, and where it is deemed impractical for us or unsafe, or it would breach government rules and regulations in any rate, we have moved a number of the audits, and they will be undertaken, and they would have shown in the previous report. So that's under section 5, and we have there portico and where there were a couple of audits, and on the SLEP side where a number of the audits needed to be amended to take on board some additional work they prioritised and we needed to perform. Areas, there's no new areas of concern, and the assurance levels there are normal to be included, as is the exception risk rankings. So in relation to the audit work that we have completed, you have summarised versions in section 9 onwards, and I'm happy in due course to take any questions. And there is a summary in relation to the grants that have been performed and sign off. What wasn't included in the last report was a summary in relation to vessels, so it has been included in this particular one. And then we have follow-ups. So section 11 onwards will narrate as to whether we have performed a follow-up in a particular area, and you can see what the original assurance level was and now what the residual assurance level is following any follow-up reviews. So you can actually see whether there has been good movement or not in all of those cases. For this year, we had introduced, and it's envisaged will continue as well for next year, that where there is an exception that is open, even following an initial follow-up review, that we would put it back on the table and carry out a second. I do not envisage us undertaking a third review. What would happen is all activities would go back into the normal pot for an assessment as to whether a full review should be performed. And so this particular section shows you the results of follow-up work and their latest position. So contaminated land, as an example, will go back in the pot to be considered, I think, not for next year's plan, but for the following years. And section 13 shows you which reports are in draft as at that particular date, and audits that are in progress. But then again, that also was as at the 18th of February. So I will cease sharing, Chair, but I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. But I have a couple of people who want to ask questions. Lucy, could I ask you, on relation to the grants for COVID that the Council have received, you do say in your report, there's no requirement for internal audit to verify the amounts or type of income losses, for instance. That's on the income loss compensation. On the business rates, some money has been got back. But what you've seen so far, because you've got a bit of a report here, is the setup that we've got robust enough to deal with potential fraud?
The arrangements that were put in place for the various pockets of grants, in actual fact on the Portsmouth side, have been pretty robust. What we have experienced, and bearing in mind I've got exposure across a number of unitaries, is that there has been organised crime that are very astute in how to take advantage of situations of this nature. So from a Portsmouth perspective, good sound framework in place. Yes, there are some examples of where we're not entirely happy. However, the percentages are very low. I think until we've done all exercises, I wouldn't be able to kind of confirm and go beyond. But I think Portsmouth has done a really, really good job considering the circumstances, and anything that we have experienced has been minor in nature.
Okay, thank you Lucy, it's very reassuring, I must say. But as you say, we'll see reports in the future. Could I ask Councillor Judith Blythe, please, Judith?
Thank you, Chair. I've got three little questions, and I'll do them in reverse order because I'm scrolling up and down on my other screen. The contaminated land. We've done the first, and it was limited assurance, high. Then a first follow-up, high. Second follow-up, high. This is actually quite an important area of work, contaminated land. I wondered if when you were going to look at it again, and whether we'd see a more satisfactory result next time round. Or is there some sort of reason that you can talk about that would explain this?
Most of the issues around the contaminated land were not around any assessments in relation to contaminated land in itself. It is more around the strategic framework, which is why I haven't put it back in the plan for next year, however envisaged that I would for 22-23. So I don't know if that gives you, it's still not a good scenario to be in, because if you need to have your framework robust, then it needs to be robust. However, it's not causing, there isn't a safeguarding or health and safety issue.
I was going to ask whether there's any danger to the public in any way.
Not that we're aware of, no.
Okay. Now the other one is the Director of Regeneration as well, which is the residential parking. And that has gone from limited assurance to limited assurance. Is there anything that we need to know about that?
That particular one has had an element of an impact in relation to COVID that has stalled some of those actions, be it that those actions should still have been implemented pre-COVID. But I think the narrative around, well, it's been derailed, is probably valid kind of second time round. Again, I think it's more about the dissemination or the purchasing of a number of the residential parking. They'd had a change with their provider where they needed to put in new arrangements. So there isn't anything that causes me a huge concern, but it is something that I have put to one side more so than the contaminated land, because obviously there is a monetary figure that would be attached particularly to that area.
Thank you. That is reassuring. Thank you. And my last thing is I was overall pleased and quite impressed to see that the section that you put in, which I'm just scrolling down to now, about the impact of COVID and the way you've audited COVID grants, even when that wasn't a requirement, and those things, and your reassurance you gave to Councillor Madden. But the you've also had a section. There's a section on our page 67, your page 9, that is all about audits removed from the audit plan. Do any of those cause you any real worry or concern?
I'm looking at them now. So
I mean, water safety is clearly an important one. There are some that when you first read the headlines, you get a bit nervous.
You do. I'm just going through them now. So the likes of St Jude, St Paul's, they're in the new. Substance misuse contract review, and that will be in the new plan. Water safety, the issues are around the strategic side again. There's a number of the grants where the government have continued paying, so the sign-off date is late. I'm looking at health and safety, but again, we have kind of lifted and shifted, so we'll do a review. Home to school is probably an area that would stick out for me as one that we definitely need to. However, that is back in the plan and it's envisaged as long as we can, and we can do so safely, that the review would be performed in Q1. So to answer your question, sorry, shorter than what I'm now doing, I would say home to school, but we'll look at it in Q1.
And are our concerns there still about potential safeguarding issues?
They would be in relation to third parties and us seeking the evidence, which was what was historically on the table. I think, though, the follow-up reviews that we had historically performed, there was a significant shift. So My only apprehension around it is we need to retest to give you that definite. I think the indication is that it should have moved on.
I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. This is a genuine worry because there is potentially some, risks to children with some of the greatest needs in the city here. The last question, Chair, I'm so sorry, is the SLEP. There's a whole list of things for the South Solent LEP. And do we audit that for the rest of the LEP, or is that something that each local authority would make their decisions? And is there any danger of duplicating effort there?
The Portsmouth City Council are the accountable body for the SLEP.
Okay. Yeah.
There isn't a requirement. However, because we are the accountable body, it's good practice to have some exposure. And the chief exec of the SLEP a number of years ago, under a service level agreement with us, so they've been having regular reviews which get reported to you. And the only real reason there has been a lot of movement and audits taken out is they had a lot of grant work that came in. So we've almost flexed to say, let's take that out this time and we'll put it in next.
And none of them are very worried about that?
No, they actually led on, can we take those out? Whereas totally independent with what goes in the plan, and I bring along to yourselves to say this is what I'd like to audit, and the directors and the chief exec here can have influence. However, it's not their decision. The SLEP can have more involvement because of the nature and activity and because there isn't a mandatory required. So yes, they were comfortable.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you. Good looks like overall, considering all the difficulties we've had this year, it's a very reassuring report.
Thank you, Judith. I see Councillor Tom Wood has joined us. Welcome, Tom. Have you any declarations of interest?
Hello, Chair. Apologies for my lateness.
Okay.
I have no interest to declare.
Okay, just to let you know, Tom, we're on item 6 at the minute. Okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Simon Bowser, please. Simon.
Thanks, Leo. Lizzie, I mean, from the outset, can I say what a great report it is? I think we've in the time that I've been on governance and audit, which was probably since last century in its previous guise, this report has evolved into, let's put it like this, one of the more user-friendly reports by a country mile that we get coming to governance and audit. So fair play. I mean, it's nice to see something that reads and makes sense. However, there is something that worries me, or perhaps doesn't make an awful lot of sense. There's a couple of audits under 9 where agreed actions are scheduled to be implemented by January 2021. Obviously, we're in March. Have they actually been done? Because the one I'm looking at on page 70 somewhat worried me, and I had to read it 2 or 3 times just to see whether I was misreading it. It was to do with care leavers. And it says care leaver cases, 14 out of 25 pathway plans, not being conducted or reviewed within a timely manner, i.e. conducted within 3 months of a child turning 16 or 3 months from entering care, by an average delay of 9.7 months. Now, am I reading that something that should be done within 3 months is actually taking almost 10 months? Or is that actually 10 months plus the 3 months they're already missing? So it's over a year that they're actually missing this by, because that would seem to be somewhat worrying. And I'm just looking to see whether that's actually been implemented now, because I think, as I understand it, the agreed actions are usually determined largely by the departmental manager putting in place the timeline by which he or she is going to achieve compliance.
So care leavers was a review that was undertaken a number of months ago, and this is the first opportunity to bring it to you. I think we went to issue, but actually then went and did some further testing when something actually was resolved and we thought it hadn't been. So there was a slight delay. So the fact that they've got an implementation of January 2021, we don't know yet because we haven't done the follow-up, but that would have been quite feasible because I think from recollection we concluded this before Christmas, around the Christmas time. But as I said, it's the first time that we've really been able to kind of perhaps pull it together and bring it to you. I will double check, but I think you are reading it correct. Now, there is some implications kind of around COVID and around the testing period that we withdrew. And I know Children's Services had to put a number of additional arrangements in place. It never ceased, obviously, any of its safeguarding activities. But for those where there were the safeguarding wasn't of an issue, it needed to come up with alternative ways of getting to see children and having that regular support. So I'll come back and have and confirm for you as a definite. Children's Services were very engaged throughout this process. So we will do a follow-up. I will trigger the follow-up in April. So the next time we come back to you, in any rate, we'll have a complete picture. But in the interim time, I will confirm whether we are all reading that correctly. But I think you're...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's some serious issues around that, and it would be good to get an update. The same applies on page 74 to contract for pilots of director reports. Again, that one, agreed actions scheduled for to be implemented by January 2021, and the same sort of question applies there. I hear what you're saying about coming back to us. It might be useful, Lizzie, and I'll bow to the rest of the committee here, if perhaps just an email update will suffice that could be attached to the report, because we're likely to be in a situation where the next Governance and Audit Standards Committee meeting is probably not going to be until about the autumn time, certainly past the local elections. And obviously, two members of the committee, at least the best of my knowledge, are actually standing down. And it would be useful if we could have, albeit an email circulated to the committee members, to give a view on both of those, that yes, they have been implemented and the new procedures are in place at the very least. I'm not looking for chapter and verse. It's just that obviously we're sat in March and they should have been implemented 2 months ago. And if there are reasons why they haven't, it would be useful to know those as well. But I'll leave that up to the chairman to determine. But I think it's something we've done in the past where we've had an email follow-up on these sorts of things. And I think, given the nature, the fact that it could be 5-6 months before this committee meets again, I think certainly with the care leavers one, it would be of comfort to know that there are new procedures, they have been implemented and things are working well.
That's not a problem, Councillor Bosher. I will give you an update via email if that's what is agreed. Chances are they have implemented, we just have not gotten back to it yet.
That's fine. Up to you, Chair, if you're happy with that suggestion.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've done it before, and it'd be nice just to. There are 3 members stepping down.
Are there 3? I didn't know you were stepping down, Leo.
Yeah, well, there you are. You never know everything. Judith Smythe, Judith.
My concern is on that one. It's the last sentence of the care leavers, particularly the timeliness of case supervisions, evidenced by internal audit for 14 out of the 25 sample cases. I'm just very worried about the underlying systems there and the whether or not that is something we ought to be very worried about, or we can afford not to be too worried because things have been put right and there haven't been any disasters. So I think if you could include that in your reassurance, Lizzie, I'd be very grateful.
I think you're right on that one. I think the first instance is to understand whether things have been done by the date set, because as I understand it, the management team there will agree the timeline. And of course, the obvious question is, if they haven't met the implementation by a timeline that they determined, then you want to know the reasons why not. I suggest the word COVID might fit there somewhere. But having said that, I think there is something that needs to be drilled down into a little bit more here. And it may well be, and it's probably going to be for probably a newly constituted committee, but it could be something on the back of the email that we agree to take as a separate item at a future meeting to look at this particular audit and issue as a singular report, shall we say, rather than through internal audit.
Okay, Lizzie. Okay, that's taken on board then. I don't have any other members indicating, so can we move to the recommendation then, which is that we note the audit performance and results for 2021 to the 18th of February 21. Is that okay, members? Thank you. Can we move on to item 7? This is Lizzie again. Data security breaches. The floor is yours, Lizzie.
Thank you, Chair. And in actual fact, Helen Magri is also in attendance.
Good afternoon.
That's fine, thank you.
This report, which we had amended, is the second report we have brought to you in this particular format. Helen will know all of the finer detail and will be able to answer any questions I think that you pose. However, it is to give you an update from the last reporting period to date of any breaches that we have had, which areas those breaches have occurred, and a narrative around or an indication around the nature of some of those breaches. So there are several pages there, as I said, following on from the previous report that was presented to you. Towards the end, which is on page 100 onwards, you have a summary of all of those particular cases, as I said, since the last reporting period. It wasn't going to go beyond that. Helen, I don't know if there is anything you wanted to add.
Only to say in that period, you'll note that there weren't any breaches that met the threshold for having to report to the Information Commissioner's Office. We don't have any outstanding cases with the ICO at the moment, which is good news. And you will see that the root cause of the vast majority of those breaches was human error, and the majority of those were caused by emails being sent to the wrong recipient. But I think we mentioned at the last meeting, we have got some measures that will be coming into place with the Microsoft 365 apps that will help us with some control over that. So there'll be pop-up messages that will appear where the system detects that certain information is contained in an email, or there's a certain format to the email that will prompt the sender to check various things, check the sender, check the attachment. So that will be coming along later in this year to staff, so that will be very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Lucy, for that. I don't have anybody indicating. I have no questions or points on this, but Councillor Judith, please.
It's just a question, really. I mean, there are quite a lot of these human error things in children's services. Would it children's, family and education, where, of course, confidentiality and so forth is really important? Is there a systemic problem behind that? And would any of that be to do with COVID-19?
Lizzie, yeah. Sorry, you go ahead.
Sorry. Funnily enough, we had at the Information Governance Board, to which Helen chairs and I attend, it had been identified a number of months ago that there was a higher level. Internal audits, so putting a kind of the other hat on, undertook a review which are yet to brief back to the Information Governance Board. However, we looked at the nature of the breaches that had occurred, and there were no particular patterns, which was a tad frustrating. They had undertaken a number of actions every time there had been a breach that had occurred. It does make it difficult when there is no pattern that's sat underneath.
Yeah. Additionally, Helen Dickerson from Legal Service and myself met with the senior management team for Children's Services, and made sure they're aware of the nature of the breaches, and they were going to discuss amongst themselves how they might be able to further make changes to make sure they don't happen again. So I think, you know, we're keeping that conversation open and constantly working. Each time something happens, we're constantly working with the team to see what they could have done differently. But I don't think particularly any of them are attributed to the current working circumstances, were they, Lizzie?
Okay. Okay, Judith, is that fine? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, members. Can we then accept the recommendation, which is that we note the breaches by reference to Appendix A and that have arisen in the action determined by the Corporate Information Governance Panel, the CIGP. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. I'll move on to item 8, which is external auditors outlined indicative 2021 audit plan. I call on David White. David?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So yes, our first paper for the committee today is the outline plan for 2020-21. The ongoing impact of later deadlines from 1920, later completion of audits, and also the new approach that we're required to take to our value for money work mean that we're not able to bring our usual full audit plan to this meeting. So we have brought the outline plan that you have in front of you. It sets out at a high level the expected risks that we expect to be in the full plan for 2021, and that's on pages 108 to 110 and the big page numbers. Most of those are closely similar to the final position for 1920, so including the enhanced risks around going concern about and valuation of property in relation to COVID. As our planning progresses, we may identify further risks, and those will be reported in the full audit plan to the next meeting. The other sort of key element of the report is to try to set out some of the differences between the previous and then the updated approach that we're now required to take to value for money assessment. And those are on page 113 to 119 per the big page numbers. So we're required to undertake a somewhat wider and more detailed risk assessment to enable us both to identify potential areas of significant weakness in arrangements and then to review those in further detail, but also to provide a sort of a commentary against the new criterion at the end of the process. And that is a fairly significant change in terms of the outcome of the value for money work from what it was previously, where we would have reported on the specific areas of potential weakness only and the outcome in respect of those. So there'll now be a wider kind of commentary to report. And as I say, that will be factored into, that assessment will be undertaken and then factored into the final version of the audit plan. The other thing which is not written in the paper, because it's only really come to light since the paper was submitted into papers for the meeting today, was that under the requirements, audit partners would usually be required to rotate off an audit after 5 years as the signing partner for an audit. But the PSAA's rules do allow a 2-year extension to that where necessary and where agreed. Helen has been on the audit for 5 years. 2021 would be her 6th year. EY did approach the PSAA to get their agreement to extend on not just this audit, but on a number of audits where the associate partner had reached the end of the 5 years, in part because of the new approach to value for money, and it didn't seem to make sense to rotate audit partners when trying to get to grips with that significant new piece of guidance. Helen has discussed that with Mr. Ward as the Director of Finance, and he had no issues with that. But she'd also asked me to bring it to your attention in the meeting today in case you had any comments or any points that you wanted to raise in that regard. That's probably all I would say on the first paper, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, David. On the last point you've made, I certainly personally have no problems with it at all. Any questions or comments, members? It's a fairly well laid out plan, I have to say, David. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we then? This was just for noting anyway. Can we note the report? Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you.
Can we move on to item 9, the External Auditors 1920 Annual Audit Letter? This has been emailed since the original notification. I hope members had a bit of time to see it, but I'll let David explain it. David, please.
Thank you. So yes, you say the second paper this afternoon is the 1920 Annual Audit Letter. And it's a requirement of the Code and the Accounts and Audit Regs that we issue an annual audit letter at the conclusion of each year's audit. And it's intended really to be sort of a public-facing version of the audit results report, which you saw in your meeting in January. As such, the majority of the content of the annual audit letter is quite similar to what was in the audit results report. So I wouldn't propose to kind of talk through that in any great detail because, as I say, we did go through that in quite a bit of detail in January. But to summarise the headlines really from the executive summary, which is on page 127 and on to page 128, at the conclusion of the audit, we issued an unqualified opinion on the Council's Statement of Accounts for 1920 and an unqualified value for money conclusion. And there was no reporting under any of our wider powers under the regulations. The one thing which has been completed subsequent to the meeting in January was our work on the Council's whole of government accounts submission, which is a separate submission made containing much of the same information as the kind of headline financial statements to enable the consolidation of the accounts at a departmental level. That work is not required to be completed to the same timescale as the main audit, and there had been, as we reported in January, some technical issues with the system that supports that process, which meant that that was ongoing. That subsequently been completed, and therefore, following the conclusion of that work, the certificate which formally closes the 1920 audit was issued on the 11th of February. The other thing in the annual audit letter towards the back end, page 156, 157, is about fees. And really there are two elements there. There's what's described as the scale fee rebasing. So the PSAA, when they launched their consultation on 2021 fees, really sort of put it into the hands of auditors and local authorities to discuss the subject of audit fees. Subsequently, the Redmond review highlighted a number of issues, including a disparity between public sector fees and those in the private sector, and that no sort of full assessment of public sector fees had been undertaken in a period of some 10 years. We therefore did an exercise to review changes in risk and regulatory requirements over that period, and we held constructive discussion with Mr. Ward around that, but he felt quite understandably that that was more a matter for the PSAA to decide, so that fee was not agreed, and that will go forward to PSAA for their consideration. The other element on the page is what you would perhaps think of as a slightly more normal in-year consideration of additional fee, and as a result of work undertaken in 1920. The bulk of that really relates to the additional risks that arose as a result of COVID-19 and in relation to the purchase of Lakeside North Harbour. That part of the fee has been agreed with the Director of Finance, so that will now go through to PSAA for their approval. That's probably all I would say on that paper, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Well, as you say, I mean, nothing new jumped out at me other than the fees bit. I read that bit with interest. I always do, but we'd expect our officers to tell us if there's anything untoward in relation to fees there. But there's nothing new for me. I had nothing to say on it. I'm just grateful to have the letter and that bit's out of the way. But I've no indication from any members. Anybody anything to say on this particular one? I think it's old ground that we've been over. Quite a lot, David, I think, to be fair to
yes,
yourself.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, can we then?
Okay, thank you.
Can we then note this? I haven't got a recommendation for it actually, so I don't know what it is. But can we note the report from David? Thank you very much, members. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, I think you're on again, aren't you? Item 10, Treasury Management Monitoring Report, Quarter 3.
I think that might be Mr.
Oh,
Lloyd.
it's internal, sorry. You're absolutely right. Sorry. Michael and Julian, thank you.
Yeah. Hello, Michael Lloyd, Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning. I'm pleased to say we've remained within the Treasury management policy. We've undertaken no further borrowing since the 60 million we borrowed in Q1, and our investment returns have continued on a downward trend reflecting the low base rate. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions, members? Any points? No, I think you've got away with that one, Michael.
Okay.
I don't mean it in that sense, but I think there's some noting of that to be done. I think we note the Council's Treasury management activities have remained within the Treasury management policy 2021 in the period up to December last year, and two, that the actual Treasury management indicators as at 31 December 20 set out in Appendix A be noted. Okay, members. Thank you. Michael, you're doing number 11 then, are you?
Yes.
Number 11, which is Treasury Management Policy 21-22.
Yes. This report will be going on to the Cabinet and the City Council, and it's brought to this committee for scrutiny. The report sets the boundaries within which Treasury management activities will be undertaken, including the types of investment counterparties and the duration of the Council's investments. The policy is the same as it was for 1920, with the exception of the recharging of borrowing costs to the housing revenue account. In the previous report, I mentioned that in 1920, we borrowed £60 million from the Public Works Loans Board. That was borrowed at the HRA certainty rate, which was a discounted rate below the rate for the General Fund. And therefore, we feel it's appropriate to put those loans into a separate loans board and allow the HRA to have a whole benefit of a reduced rate rather than putting it into the main loans pool, which is a portion between the General Fund and the HRA. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I was looking to see where I could find that, but that's the bit that jumped out at me, I must say, which seemed very interesting and indeed the best way forward. Do we know then what the savings might be to the HRA account?
Yes, those free loans were taken at an average rate of 1.17%, which is what the HRA will be charged. If we'd put them into the main loans pool and apportioned the cost, the HRA would have been paying around 3% for that borrowing.
For simplicity and for me, could you put that in monetary terms then, Michael? What sort of money will they benefit from having?
Well, 2% of 60 million.
Not off the top of my head, Michael. A fair amount of money.
Well, I make
120,000.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well done. Thank you. Anyway, that was my point. Councillor Judith Smythe. Judith, please.
Taking these reports together, and I suppose I should have put my hand up or more quickly for the last report. Is there anything in here that worries you particularly about areas where there's been significant movement, particularly where that might be to do with COVID-19 and there might be a long-term trend here? And the second question, which I think may be linked to it, is that the earlier report doesn't include any movements in valuation of any property that we might hold for investment. And are we going to have a chance to have a look at revaluations and reports that might have been, and rents that might have been affected? Now, I'm not talking about HRA here. I'm talking about the other investments. Thank you.
Well, to answer the first question, as far as the effect of COVID on Treasury management is concerned, In the short term, it's probably helped us a bit because a lot of government money's come our way and been paid up front. In the longer term, I suspect it will be a little bit more challenging for the council, but that will be through the extra costs that the council may pick up in the future through things like public's mental health deteriorating. In terms of the returns on investment properties, that's actually really beyond the scope of Treasury management, so it wouldn't be reported in a Treasury management report.
But presumably, Chair, we might want to ask at a later date for a report on the effect of COVID on our rental incomes and on the capital value of our portfolio.
Yeah, well, I would assume that's going to come forward at some stage, Michael.
It won't be a report which I would be writing.
Okay. Somebody else will be. Will it, Julian?
Chair, thank you. Yes, all I was going to say, yes, that would be a report that you could call forward from the Director of Regeneration, and it's perfectly within your remit to ask the Director to prepare such a report for you to be brought forward to a future meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Vicky, could you note that and put it in the minutes that we'll call for a report from the Director of Regeneration?
Yes, of course, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other points, members? Okay, thank you. Can we then note the recommendations in section 3 of the report? And as Michael said, this goes on to Cabinet and full Council anyway, so we have a chance to have a go at it again. Is that all right? Agreed, members? Thank you. Item 12 is the appointment and reappointment of independent members. I don't know who's dealing with this. Helen.
That will be me.
How are you?
Hello. I'm Helen Dickerson. I'm Head of Litigation in the Legal Services Department. I'm here today in place of Peter Bolf, City Solicitor, to present this report about the appointment of independent members. There's 2 recommendations within the report. It's quite a short report, thankfully. The first one is to increase the number of independent members that we have from 4 members to 5. And the second is to reappoint 2 of the members, Carol Damper and Diana Turner, as independent members for a further 3 years. I'm happy to take questions if needed.
Thanks very much. Well, we did in our last minutes pay thanks and tribute to the independent members anyway who've turned up in our panel, so we're more than pleased with them. But the recommendation to our members is to increase to 5. Again, this goes on to full council, I understand. Decrease to 5, but to reappoint Carol Damper and Diana Turner. I've only worked with Carol in the past, but I know how good they are. But have we any problems with this, members? Is that okay? Can we agree with recommendations then? I say it goes on to full council anyway. So we increase.
The other one is,
oh, sorry.
The other one is also to appoint Chris Ryder, who would be the 5th member.
I was about to come on to that.
Sorry.
I was going to read them out, Helen, but that's absolutely right. And we interviewed, Simon and I interviewed this person anyway, as I recall. So the council increased the number of independent persons to 5 from 4. The council reappoints Carol Damper and Diana Turner as independent members for a further 3 years from the 1st of May 21 through to the 30th of April 24. And 3, the council appoint Chris Ryder as an independent person for 3 years from 1st of May 21 through to 30th of April 2024, subject to 1 above. So if we agree to the 5, then we agree to recommendation 1, we agree to recommendation 3. Are they agreed, members? Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you. Item 13 is review of members' allowances. That's you again, Helen.
It is, yes. And this is basically to seek approval for the review process from the committee with regard to the members' allowances to be considered by full council rather.
Well, I think members will agree that we do that. We've always done that anyway, and it's interesting to see the minutes of the meeting, and I think sometime in January over the panel itself. But yes, this goes on to full council. Is that agreed, members? Okay, thank you. Okay, Helen, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Right. Item 14 is, as I recall, the what is 14? Exclusion of the press. In case we go, we've got two parts of the report on procurement management, the bits in the public domain, and also confidential bits. So I have to move the exclusion of the press and public if we go into the confidential bits. So if members are going to go into, just notify us that you've got questions in there, and then we'll go into the confidential bit. Otherwise, if we can, we'll stick to the white paper, or the stuff of the white paper. So procurement management information, item 15. Can I call Richard, please? Thank you, Richard.
Good afternoon, councillors. Yeah, so I'll take you through, as you said, the top level report and any detail after the organ exempt session. So running through, it's largely the same as the report that we took last time in terms of format and coverage. So it covers off the three key performance areas in spend compliance, contract awards that have been made via waiver, and contract management performance reporting. In respect of the spend compliance, the report that you have received, I did look into that after that had been submitted, because the overall compliance figure, as you would have seen, had gone from 96% down to 90%. And I went back over the numbers as I was scratching my head as to why there would have been that dramatic a drop down. There was a significant row which had been wrongly allocated, which was a land transaction. It had been assigned into housing, neighbourhood and building services, and that land transaction was significant in value. The actual overall non-compliant spend for housing with that corrected is £42,000 rather than the £606,000 that have been reported there. Actually puts them up to 99% and puts the overall compliance still unfortunately below the 95% target, but puts it at 94%. So apologies to the committee for that one. Hopefully it's the lesser of two evils in terms of what I could have updated you there in respect of inaccuracy. Running through the rest of the numbers on that and in terms of what's in the report here. No concerns really with adult services. Children, families and education. Appears there's been quite a lot of IT equipment purchases which have gone on out in the schools. There is one purchase of appears to be a temporary structure, but nothing there which is really anywhere near a £100,000 tender threshold or anywhere near the £189,000 threshold where we need to go out by statute. No concerns with corporate services. Culture compliance is down, and it has gone down again, but the actual value of the spend is low. So there's a bit of tidying up to do there in relation to making sure we get the contracts on the register. but nothing really there of any significant concern. Executive and finance, no concerns. Housing, neighbourhood, building services, as I said, there was that one culprit which I've looked at, which was a property transaction which had brought it all down. Looking at the rest of it, there is one other contract that I do need to look into, which relates to a contract we had with a term service provider for electrical term service maintenance and projects. I need to have a chat with the assistant director there to find out whether that is actually subject to a waiver or not. It's in excess of £100,000, so I do need to look into that particular one and can answer a few more questions on that as far as I can in the exempt session. No concerns in respect of the port or public health. Regeneration, we do have two transactions there. One which is related to Lakeside, and I need to sit down with the assistant director there and get a solution in place on that one. It's essentially a staff resource who we have appointed via a consultancy contract. So I need to find what we can do to resolve that particular one. The other one relates to a design package with a consultant, and on that particular one, it's the design strategy has moved from only taking us through to maybe front level of planning in terms of the design detail to actually developing the design to a greater extent in view of the particular challenges of the building that we're seeking to refurbish there. Again, it's above the tender threshold. It is still below the £189,000 statutory threshold, and it is a fixed fee, so it's not going to creep above that amount. It is also linked to a Ravelin scheme as well. So when it comes to the full-blown works contract, that will actually be outside of public contract regulations by using the Ravelin company. Capital schemes, another no significant concerns there. So in respect of section 1, do you want to come with any questions at this point, or do you want me to move through the rest of the report and answer questions at the end? Councillor Smythe?
Yeah,
I was alarmed to hear you say that Ravelin, which is a council-owned company, was outside some of our regulations. How does that happen?
Ravelin is classed as an economic operator in the same way as Portico is. So if we utilise Ravelin to build out particular developments, and particularly developments which we're not really allowed to build out under Local Government Act because they're moving outside of what we're set up to do and moving into commercial arrangements, by virtue of that, we actually do need to use it via a private company. So when Ravelin procures, whilst I still have involvement into that and provide a level of assurance and governance, it's with a different hat on per se. Does that answer your question, Councillor Smythe?
I hope there aren't too many. I hope there isn't a drop in standards in the way that we're running Ravelin. And I did look at the original documents that when it was set up, and I didn't come out too worried about that. But you've now worried me a bit. Maybe it's something we should look at. We shouldn't be harbouring a company, owning a company that's letting good standards of good practice slip too much, really.
Understood. The particular contract that's in question there did start off as a below £100,000 contract. It still should have had a contract entry associated with it. That one's actually being let by the council because Ravelin is still in the process of coming into operation. But we want to be developing the scheme to the point where we're ready to invite tenders from the contracting market. That one should have stayed below the 100k if they'd have stayed on the original design strategy, which would have meant that the contractor would have been appointed earlier and picked up the design risk. On that particular building, they wanted to keep a higher level of control because of some of the risks associated with the building through doing a refurbishment. So that's what's led that to creep up. When it comes into the procurement that we'll then run through Ravelin through the works contractor, I can assure the committee that I am plugged into that, and that the contracting strategy is still run past me on that basis, and that I did have input into their procurement charter and that they've established. We're still running through the fine detail in terms of the governance around Ravelin, and there is a workshop on that next Friday.
Okay, Judith. Yeah. Had you finished? You'd finished the paper in the public domain, Richard, I think, had you?
I'd finished section 1, so that was around the spend compliance. In respect of the next sections, if you want me to continue on to those.
Okay, please do.
It was around the contract awards via waiver. And in terms of where we are on those, there is still a level of business as usual direct awards which are going on. I'll go into a summary on that. There are significantly less waivers that have now been let in direct response to COVID-19. And what I mean by that, we are not buying in PPE directly or buying additional IT equipment and food supplies for shielded and aspects like that. The waivers in response to COVID-19 really now are much more concerned with allocation of grants and so forth, as I'll summarise. We still are having some waivers that are being agreed due to COVID-19 in respect of retender delay, but we are also now starting to see some waivers we're having to enter into due to emergency basis in relation to Brexit, unfortunately. Business as usual on those direct awards. There was one significant one here which is to do with major software application. We are going to be out to tender on that one over the next year. We couldn't tender it last year because essentially we are looking at switching from one piece of software to another, which obviously comes at a significant capital cost. So we literally couldn't afford to do anything about it last year until we had the capital program in place. So that will be brought into compliance in this year. We have another one which is to do with warm homes funding. Central government has been very, very generous in respect of putting funding out into public sector for schemes such as warm homes, so helping us to get residents out of fuel poverty, helping us in respect of carbon footprint and aspects like that. Central government wants that money to be moved out very, very, very quickly, and in order to actually secure the grant funding, it requires us to partner with an experienced partnership organisation to actually put the applications in. So in order to obtain the funding, which is significant, it's in the millions of pounds, we ended up undertaking a direct award to a partner organisation. We've since put a transparency notice out, and that has timed out. So in terms of the challenge risk, we've been through the challenge period on that, but that was essentially the reason behind doing so. Another one, the next one down is really just fully on a transparency basis. We weren't so concerned that we'd breached anything on that particular aspect, but we just wanted to provide absolute transparency to the market there. When we turned on an option to extend the scope of that contract, that's to do with automatic meter readers across our portfolio, which essentially allows us to have a much better picture of our utilities consumption, which allows us to bring costs down significantly and also bring down our carbon footprint. The last transaction there was in relation to grant allocation. Whilst it's required under a waiver, it's not actually covered fully under public contract regulations, as that's actually classed as a strategic grant. So there isn't a wider statutory risk aspect to that. It's purely our own processes. Waivers agreed due to COVID-19 in respect of retender delay. We've had two significant ones that we had to award on that basis, both related to the same service, which is our lift maintenance and repair service. We were due to go out to tender literally just as COVID hit. A large part of that market was furloughed on the bidder's side because it was difficult to do major capital refurbishments of lifts, because especially in residential settings, undertaking works whilst residents were in occupation when we're in lockdown was just impossible. So the bidding capacity was significantly diminished, and on that type of contract as well, to do it successfully, we'd need to be able to show prospective bidders around our properties. So unfortunately, that just made that an impossibility. We will be issuing an award notice out imminently, so next week, and as part of that award notice, it will also then be talking about the procurement process, which we're actually due to commence next month, to bring those contracts into compliance. Waivers in response to COVID, essentially that is around further grant funding, and also in respect of food vouchers during the school holiday periods. The school holiday period one is probably the only one which would be viewed as a true public contract. And we did actually utilise a central government arrangement on that particular, the one which we were directed to do so by DFES, for better or worse on that particular one, unfortunately. But in respect of a compliance basis, there's not any significant concerns on that one. Waivers in response to Brexit, through getting ourselves ready for potential queues of lorries. We've had to stand up operations site in Tipner. That has involved putting security personnel onto that site, plus providing them with facilities. We were ready to do that the first time around and had actually worked in close partnership with the two firms that were involved in these waivers. We were seeking to bring those contracts into a level of compliance over the last year. Unfortunately, a lot of those well-intended plans went out the window when the pandemic hit us in March. So by the time that we could look at those again, there wasn't really the time for us to put those back out to the market and then enable working with a new partner. We'd have to bring into a range of stakeholders, including police and various others, to get a plan in place that would have been effective. So that's what's led to those particular ones there, I'm afraid. Any questions on section 2 before I move on to section 3?
I'll move on now, Richard, thanks.
Okay, and in respect of section 3, contract management, performance and monitoring, we've not made as much progression on this as I would have hoped for. Unfortunately, the very capable contract manager that we had on a temporary basis found a permanent job elsewhere. We're going to have to go back out again, probably on a temporary basis again, because we have a secondment situation in the department. In respect of that, the figures haven't changed too dramatically. We've got 2 contracts that have fallen into the red, one of which has expired and we won't use again, and the other one which we, under investigation, the service has improved quite significantly since then, and I think there's a bit of a debate to be had in terms of whether that should have been a red rather than an amber, in view of the nature of the performance issue. Red really is something which is fairly catastrophic. The number of ambers has remained largely the same. There's actually quite a lot more golds which have gone up now, showing there's been some higher levels of performance. So it looks like there's a number that have gone from green to gold there. A number which concerns me, which I'll be looking to address in the next quarter, is in respect of KPIs which have expired. And looking into that, what's driven that big large number there is the highways PFI. The KPI has been missed on that, so I need to get that addressed. And there's a few other large contracts, the gas servicing contracts in housing. I'm not concerned that those contracts aren't being managed, knowing that we have contract managers in place on those contracts that I'm in fairly regular correspondence with. I think it's simply that the KPI hasn't been completed, but I will be taking that up in the next quarter. We've had an addition onto that report as well, which I'm hoping is useful, but I will take your steer on this, which is to try to give a status update to the committee, where we've had changes in respect of contracts. So have we had contracts that have moved from amber to red, ones that have gone down from green to amber, ones that have stayed at amber, so less than satisfactory, and some that have actually moved up from less than satisfactory into a level of satisfaction again. I can't go into a great level of detail on those particular contracts, but I'm happy at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions in the exempt session. That is section 3. So any questions on section 3 from the committee?
Members, any questions on that? I was just thinking, as you were doing, particularly the last bit, Richard, that it might be useful for the committee at some time in the future to give a talk on how we could achieve green or gold because that's our aim, isn't it? You know, we come to all the meetings I've been at, and Councillor Bush as well. There's been amber and there's been poor performances, and we're always going to do something about it. I just wonder. Clearly, senior management hopefully are on top of this, but I think it might be useful, you know, from your good self saying, well, with some examples.
Yes.
Actually, not necessarily the sections, but you know, some examples to say this happened. And it shouldn't have happened because if they'd done this, this would have been better. And maybe, I don't know, rewrite a code or something like that, Richard. But that's very interesting. I thank you much for that. So maybe sometime the summertime or the autumn, just not on top of this, just saying how we could reach our goal of getting to green or gold on all occasions and what might stop us doing it. Is that okay?
Of course. We were starting to put work in place to do that before.
Oh, that's excellent.
Individual left, unfortunately. We've got a simplified KPI model which can be applied across all contracts.
Okay.
One of the barriers was the model was too complicated and didn't talk to all the contracts.
Yeah.
That's about ready to go. We just need to bring the resource in to assist. And the other thing that I'm hoping that we're starting to move towards with the new table there is to hopefully show where performance tracks over time. So what I'd like to be able to show to the board is, okay, if a contract is amber, did it stay at amber in the next quarter, in which case that is a big concern. If something is staying at red and we haven't done something about it, that is significant concern as well. And what we're seeking to do is to create a contract management forum across the organisation so that we can start bringing contract managers together so that we're helping each other out across the organisation. We've got some fantastic commissioners, fantastic contract managers, and we don't always bring the expertise together to help us solve problems. So that's another big thing that we're going to seek to do over the coming months.
Well, yeah, that sounds very good. That's excellent, and we could feed into that perhaps at some stage. I haven't got our members. Do members want to go into an exempt session? No. We don't. Richard, thank you very much for that. It is a report just for noting anyway. Thank you for that, and we'll see you sometime in the future. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, well, that's the end of this meeting. Then I think the next one's in July. I would just like to thank members who aren't seeking re-election this year. Councillor John Ferret. John and I have worked together for many years, John, haven't we, on this and other committees? Councillor Tom Wood is not seeking re-election this year, and I've known Tom for many years, and I shall miss him on the council as well as I'm here for Tom. But Tom, thank you very much for that. And Councillor Neil Young, thank you for him. At one stage, you remember, Neil, you and I were the only two at the committee meeting or the pre-meeting. Well, thank you all very much for your work, and I'll see you whenever. Thank you very much. Cheers then.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.